Hello, Thaddeus. In light of the video responder that we had to our feminism videos and the reaction that I had to his tripe, I wanted to make one last video explaining why I'm not particularly all that interested in, Kitty, get away from there, responding to men's rights advocates and engaging them in debate. This video is going to be in two parts. The first is going to be responding in general to why I don't think such a debate is even possible, and the second is to respond more directly to the video responder Chaz Wald Almighty, or Wald, I don't know, whatever he wants. We'll call him Chaz. First, I'd like to read a part from Scott Benson's Tumblr about the response to his Nice Guys video. It expresses very similar attitudes to what I myself kind of feel about just responding to stuff on the internet in general.
First off, I'm not particularly interested in battling these issues out in the comments section. Not every piece of art is an invitation to a private summit where we will debate it. A cartoonist who drew that one political newspaper cartoon you didn't like has no obligation to respond to angry letters, and my chosen delivery medium being the internet doesn't change that. Also, to be frank, the vast majority of critical comments I've received in the past 24 hours have been from, not to put too fine a point on it, angry white teens and antisocial 20-somethings. And you, Anonymous, are the first to respectfully bring up a point other than, straw man, you are obviously a misandrist fag, you are white knighting, you have seriously never fucked a bitch, bro, etc. Even on the few man forums I've looked at to see what the more critical reaction might be, the discussion has focused more on digging up unflattering pics of me online, they exist, and discussing how I need to lose weight. Working on it, thanks, and look like a woman undergoing hormone therapy. Yeah, because those people are only worthy of disdain, right? This is funny because in their rush to mention how not shallow, hateful, and fearful they are, they still boiling down most criticisms to a question of physical appearance and a number of women I have bedded, and how this must render my observations invalid. That is their measuring system of success and authority. This is why I'm not interested in debating this stuff. Additionally, I'm 31. I'm a full-time independent artist. I have relationships and stuff to do. I have several other projects currently in the fire. Spending time jousting with angry dudes online is something that most people my age have long since grown out of, or never started doing in the first place. I am an artist. I make art. If one is looking for a way to combat a piece of art, might I recommend making your own art and culture to communicate your own points. I make things about things that matter to me, not because I want to find people to debate it with online. If I wanted to do that, I'd show up on Reddit forums and be like, yo, let's fight. It would save time and really, arguing with misogynists, men who primarily see women as alternatively parasites, fascist whores, and dudes who spend their waking hours trying to unlock the intricacies of using women for sex holds about as much interest to me as arguing with a racist or a homophobe, while pushing my face slowly into a belt sander, and being menaced by lions full of wasps on a humid day.
Quite succinctly, like Benson, I have other and better things that I would like to be doing. This has nothing to do with other people, as my time is not their time. They don't have to listen to my material just as much as I don't have to hear what they have to say about my material. They can demand a debate all they want, and it's my prerogative to decline that debate. And, like Benson later suggests, there are other people who are more than willing to have that debate with you. I just personally happen to not be one of them. Secondly, for a debate to take place, both sides have to make an honest attempt to address and understand the other's arguments. This may be easiest to understand in terms of the straw man fallacy. However, my main concern is not that my arguments are not being represented properly, it's rather that they're not even being understood, and that no effort is being put in towards understanding them because they don't fit within the constructed paradigm of MRA arguments and responses, meaning that the stuff that is generally out there on the internet that people respond to and counterpoint with is not what I am generally using. Third, and this is my primary reason why I'm not interested in such a debate, is that a debate is not what's being sought. While MRAs may claim that they're looking for an intellectual engagement, what the reality is that they're trying to achieve subject status through performing a particular identity, an aggressive and hyperbolic response towards women particularly through online media. Two key features of this identity are masculine and intellectual status. I should probably say now that as an academic, my research focuses on identity construction. And my deconstructions of identity are not there to diminish another person, but rather to understand how an identity comes together and understand the ideologies that ground that identity. I'm looking into MRA identity in this video, not so much to say that they're bad people, they can prove that enough themselves, but rather to demonstrate why they're not looking for a debate. What's being sought here, rather than a rigorous academic discourse, is rather an e-peen contest, to put it crudely, which, if we're gonna have one of those, and I was willing to have one of those, I would probably win that because A, I have enough experience on the internet, and B, I know enough Latinate jargon to make even the most simplest of points into a complex puzzle. That's not really bragging, but rather the reality of spending as much time as I have in academia. In terms of the masculine identity of MRAs, things like gender studies, feminism, and postmodernism present a threat to the idea that there is an inherent rigid gender definition. Ideas like Judith Butler's gender as performance mean that anybody can perform any gender. Though, from the various discourse that I've read and heard from MRAs, I don't think that transsexuals are their biggest concern, especially if those transsexuals are conforming to the rigid masculine identity that they hold. More concerning, perhaps, is that these ideas have turned gender from a binary of just female and male into a spectrum from a rigid idea of what masculinity is to a rigid idea of what feminism is, with everybody generally coming somewhere in between that. Especially now that women are allowed to wear pants. Basically, gender identity is no longer a fixed point. There's no guarantee that there will be an inherent masculine identity that the society will agree upon. Rather, the idea is now that A, there's a spectrum, but B, it can also change, because one of the tenets of postmodernism is that there are no such things as foundations, meaning there is no grounding upon which masculinity is built upon. So while we traditionally think of biological sex as defining what gender you will perform, postmodernism, A, kind of suggests that even how we look and identify biological sex is influenced by kind of a social construction, but also that just because you have male genitalia doesn't mean that you will have a male identity. So when there's no guarantee that there's going to be a rigid, everlasting, eternal identity, someone whose identity is wrapped up within the idea that their construction can never be changed and will always be agreed upon by society, anything that threatens that is going to cause that person some sorts of anxiety. And in terms of just kind of shortening down some psychoanalysis and some Jungian-like links, basically that anxiety is part of this search for those missing foundations that no longer exist, and that sort of search for those foundations realizes itself in terms of kind of anger and aggression mostly. However, the primary concern of many MRAs is intellectual insecurity. Traditionally, academic accolades are tied to kind of academia and the idea of a high IQ, which is also based on traditional testing levels. Now, there's also a kind of alternative means of being smart, the idea of street smarts and common sense, and I think those are just kind of another part along the spectrum of testing intelligence. So that what I really kind of value is either something like, your ability to process information quickly, be it, stuff from a discourse of academia, or the psychological tells of another person, or how to get along in, the wilderness. Basically something that is demonstrating your ability to take in and process information. As for MRAs, gaining subject status is dependent on constructing a sense of intelligence whereby they marginalize traditional academic markers, i.e. they construct theories and arguments that traditional academics are somehow not to be trusted, i.e. they construct theories and arguments as to why academics are not to be trusted and why the majority of academics and even general lay people disagree with them. This same sort of rhetoric is common to cults and conspiracy theorists, demonstrating an almost paranoid psychosis of authority, something that is kind of explained through the links between the foundations and anxiety. Thus, any other outside the group can't be trusted, therefore any information that that person presents that may contradict the identity is therefore either wrong or invalid, or to use a commonly used rhetorical device, the other person has been infected, particularly in the case of MRAs, by feminism. Now, the disease metaphor is actually pretty common in Western society, and there's quite a lot of differing types between things like cancer and HIV, and it's really dependent upon whether or not we should feel sorry for that person or whether or not they deserved it. But basically, in the case of MRAs, the ideology of feminism becomes a pathogen, whereby somebody is infected by it. Therefore, they didn't willingly accept the ideology, it was forced upon them in a way. Some sort of carrier infected them. So the MRA logic has a lot of similarities to how people with HIV and AIDS were treated back during the AIDS epidemic in this country. Now, there's also very little that anyone can do to, say, combat these sorts of pathogens. So what we can do is we can practice good hygiene or quarantine ourselves away from it. So if it was AIDS, you stayed away from all sources of bodily fluids. You know, maybe lock yourself in your house. You wouldn't get AIDS then because you wouldn't have any contact with it. So in the case of intellectual quarantines, it basically means shutting yourself off from anybody who might have a differing opinion, or finding ways to dismiss those other opinions that contradict what it is you believe. Basically, the othering process is key to developing this quarantine because somebody who is infected lacks accountability or agency. So they are no longer capable of actually acting upon their own to have had intelligence. That's where you see a lot of the markers of, hey, you're just getting that from a book, or it's someone else's idea that you're repeating ad nauseum. Importantly, by othering disagreement, subject status becomes dependent solely upon group acceptance. So as long as MRAs accept other MRAs, they get to confer themselves the subject status and the identity that goes along with becoming an MRA, the sort of intellectualism and masculinity that they pretend to purport. So whether or not either of those are true, because the group accepts the group, they have an echo chamber that reifies their belief that these identities are what they have. Basically, by repeating the discourse of the community, a person gains access to the constructed identity of that community. However, the anonymity of the internet allows anyone to, say, mimic this sort of identity, these sorts of jargons, and it makes it very hard to tell whether or not they actually truly fit the identity that they're pretending that. However, the anonymity of the internet allows anybody to mimic that sort of rhetoric without having any ability of other people to check whether or not they fit the constructed identity. So if somebody really wanted to, say, just, you know, the most ardent feminist, they could go online, create a fake identity, and become accepted by the group, and actually probably become a very popular voice within that group, and then reveal that they've been trolling all along because there's very little checks and balances to it. Rhetorically, the greatest tell that this isn't a sort of academic debate, but rather a attempt to fit a discourse community to construct an identity is not the pseudo-intellectualism, but rather the pejorative nature of the discourse. So take Chaz, for example. A lot of his comments were not academic, but they were rather quick, petty quips designed to diminish another person. They really weren't all that good anyways, but they also didn't really address the arguments being made by us. And in the case of MRAs, more often, the comments are ad hominems addressed at, you know, sexuality, masculinity, ability to have success with women, which success with women is kind of a weird way to phrase that. I mean, basically it's saying that, hi, I can have a relationship with another person. That's what you should be measuring. It doesn't mean, have I been able to have sex with this other person? And the really concerning reason I don't want to have a debate is that MRAs have this weird problem with accepting the generally used definition of patriarchy as a form of oppression, because it's just really a signifier for a series of ideas. It doesn't even really matter if you accept that those ideas exist. For all it matters, patriarchy could be called schnitzerdoodly, and it would still be used in the same meaning. It's just a word that is being used to say, here's this set of ideas and constructs that we wish to discuss, and we're going to call it this. So there's really no reason to say, oh no, it only means rule by the fathers, because nobody's saying that you have to accept that something exists just because there's a word for it. I mean, nobody's saying unicorns exist because we have the word unicorns. It just means a horse with a horn on it. And that allows us to know that we're talking about a mythical creature. And I mean, if you're going to stoop to that level of pedantry just to have your point be valid, there's really not much use in talking to you. In short, I'm not interested in debate because MRAs aren't interested in debate, and I'm not all that keen on helping them through an ontological crisis of being. Now, on to Chaz in particular. It's nice of you to make a video response, though if you want to continue doing video responses, I suggest putting something over your monitor screen so it's not reflecting off your glasses. It's just that that's keeping people from seeing your eyes, and being able to see people's eyes is kind of important in any sort of communication. It says a lot about a person. Anyways, you really did waste your time making that video. Now, I'm not going to be addressing your arguments for the simple fact that, like I've kind of said before, most of what you're saying is just MRA discourse. It's common to the group. It's just being repeated. It's something that you read from someone else and are now saying. Much like talking about the draft over and over and over and over again, it comes up way too much. Like most of these arguments, with a little bit of Googling on your part, you can find people who have already addressed and responded to them. So I don't really feel the need to do it myself because someone else already has spent the time doing it, and I have other things I'd like to do. I will say, however, that most of your arguments, propositions really, depended upon a specious analysis of data or a lack of historical knowledge. For one, I was reading from a script that I wrote because I like to think about what I'm going to say and plan it out ahead of time. This is just to ensure sort of accuracy and that I cover everything I intend to cover. Though, had you been honestly responding, you wouldn't have spent as much time as you did commenting on that fact, and rather trying to engage with the argument at hand, which I don't feel like you really did. Furthermore, I have a master's in English and a minor in history, and I have a very good grasp upon the matter at hand. You, on the other hand, demonstrate a clear lack of understanding about the problematic nature of history, in that it is primarily a written narrative, so that you have to measure a bunch of different narratives against each other because there is an inherent bias by most people in history. For example, if we were to take the Venerable Bede at his word, the cure for almost every disease would be 1 part saint, 2 parts water. For example, your hunter-gatherer society analysis is wrong. In all actuality, the anthropological data says that it was the gatherers, the women of the group, that brought in the majority of the food to the group, and because it was the women who were primarily dealing with plant matter, it's speculated that, and current theory says, that the women are probably responsible for developing agriculture as a whole. What I will point out is that the person here that needs to do more reading is you. It's glaringly obvious that you don't have the knowledge background that I do. And I really don't expect most people to do so, because most of the critical theory that is grounding what I'm saying is generally only discussed within higher academia, which a lot of people haven't done. It's not a measure of your intelligence, but rather of your knowledge base, which is a different thing. I've spent a lot of time learning things, whereas other people haven't. And so what I'd like to do is recommend to you a few books that will help you understand the critical theory that comes behind and grounds what it is that I was arguing in my other videos, and also today's video.
Introduction to Critical Theory, the Norton Anthology of Critical Theory, Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, After Theory, First as Tragedy, Then as Farce, Lenin in Philosophy and Other Essays, The Culture Industry, Gender Trouble, and some other theorists like Foucault, Derrida, Saussure are also important. And then there's a significant amount of actual historical and anthropological material that isn't on Wikipedia.
Also, another thing I'm going to be trying to do here in the coming weeks, and starting this week at all, is to add an extra bonus video a week, which if I'm trying to do it every week isn't exactly a bonus video. But basically, I want to be releasing at least one Let's Play video a week, which admittedly I am pretty terrible at, but I'm trying to up the amount of content that I'm producing a week and trying to start a schedule to help me do that. So there'll be a link at the end of this video to go and watch what is admittedly a pretty bad Let's Play video.